Christians to offer transformative witness in the modern world has been diminished, not just by disheartening stories about the church, but by the quality of the conversation within the church. Conversations that mirrors the polarization, falsehoods, and meanness of contemporary American life, rather than modeling an alternative. As communicators, we can play a role in reshaping the tenor of dialogue on social media. We'll talk about the best practices to influence the Christian presence online in a more healthy direction. And now I'd like to introduce Ann Garrido.
Well, my goodness, what an absolute delight to be with you all this morning here in St. Louis. This is my home city, so I'm so happy to welcome you to this space. So once upon a time, Christian communications was largely the realm of books and magazines and diocesan newspapers, and in the case of many of you here, congregational newsletters. Books which have no comments at all on them. Magazines that have a sweet little page in the front cover devoted to letters to the editor that would be easily screened before they got published, and then the best ones got chosen to print after a nice period of time where you had a chance to sit and reflect on what that person had written. Newsletters that were just that, news, bulletins, about what they're not a point of discussion. And then came the internet, which some of us here in the room are old enough to remember when it came into existence. And an emerging possibility for the first time that we could actually talk to each other online in the way that we talk with each other in our living rooms, with that same kind of immediacy. And then there was an email. And then, wait for it, many people all at the same time immediately. And then via websites and social media, there was the possibility that Christian communications, we could have ever more robust conversations around the ideas that we were writing about. We could put authors in contact with their audiences. We could get congregational Facebook groups going for our associates. We could live stream during COVID. We could even impact more people. Wider influence on the culture, wider conversations than ever before. And in the beginning, the church was itself very excited about these possibilities. If you look at this statement from Benedict XVI, he has this, it's a beautiful quote about a new digital continent that was rising out of the surface of the earth, through which we would be able to evangelize and be present to each other in ministry. And the Christian community alone, we were not alone in our optimism for what was going to be happening in this new means of communication that we had with each other. There were many different, also secular organizations that were very excited about the huge potential of these new media to enlarge the conversation and to facilitate engagement among people that had never been in conversation with each other before. This is the quote from NPR. When they first launched their comments page, this is back in 2008, which now seems like ancient history in this field, and NPR said, "We are providing now a forum for infinite conversations on npr.org. Our hopes are high. We hope the conversations will be smart, generous of spirit. We hope the adventure is exciting, fun, helpful, and informative." Social networks now, social network platforms, which I'm going to qualify as these opportunities for having conversation with each other, have only exponentially increased, obviously, since 2008. The most recent statistics as of July of this past year, there are 8.05 billion people on planet Earth. That's from the United Nations this summer. As of July of this year, 4.88 billion of those people are on social media. That figure grew last year by 173 million new users, which was a 3.7% increase from just the year before that. So that as of, sorry, I went a little too fast. As of July of this year, 60.6% of the human population is on social media, compared to 53% just in 2021. And in the US, that rate is at 72%. The behemoth in the room, even though my son keeps telling me this is not still the truth, but the behemoth in the room is still Facebook, with over 2.98 billion people as of July 2023. It's not the most popular of the social media platforms. WhatsApp is now the most popular platform, and then Instagram. But Facebook is still the one that is being the most used. And certainly most of us who are in ministry now, and certainly all of you who are in this room, have done more than tip their toe into this new world of social media. But many of us have immersed our entire selves into this new medium. And many of us have both personal as well as professional websites, Facebook pages, Instagram accounts, TikTok. And hearkening back to NPR's comment, it has been an adventure, hasn't it? Not necessarily of the fun or helpful or informative kind, maybe informative, though maybe the information that we've gleaned is not exactly what we thought we were going to hope for. A lot of the information that we've gleaned is just how mean-spirited and how nasty we have the capacity to be. And not just in the secular sphere, but even within the Christian sphere itself. This has become the space in which many, as Christians, some of our most difficult conversations are happening, even around issues like synod on the synodality, right, at this very moment in time. For myself, one of the images that I've enjoyed using when I've talked on this topic is using the image of leaven. The best guess that we've got available right now is that at most Christians are probably about 25% of those who are on social media around the world. And that because we're small in comparison to the grandness of what's going on out there, that what we can do as Christians is to show up like leaven in that space. That little bit, just a little bit of leaven in the dough that can change the dynamics of the entire dough, right, as it rises. That we could be contagious in this direction forward, and that the little bit that we're able to do could contribute to something far beyond what we can imagine. And I think what oftentimes we would say has happened is that actually the contagion has sort of moved in the opposite direction. That rather than transforming social media, we actually have picked up many of its worst habits within our own Christian community. And that we have become, the conversations that happen among ourselves are often as poisonous as within the church as without the church. And ironically, this statement, so I published this article, this was in NCR. The title of the article was Showing Up Christian Online, 8 Ways to Be Leaven in Social Media. The one key comment that came back was, didn't you know leaven is the symbol of sin in both the Hebrew and Greek scripture? Why did you elect that title? But we'll use somebody else's feedback rather than my own, something a little bit bigger in scope. A case in point for what I'm talking about here, and I realize this is from a couple of years back, which again is ancient history in the field that y'all are in, but I think exemplifies well the point I want to make. It's a really lovely article that appeared in First Things. And it was by the editor, Matthew Schmitz, who was talking about the dark side of Twitter, now X, of course, and how mean-spirited so many of the conversations, the tweets could be. And Schmitz he didn't call somebody else out on this, he actually called his own self out on this. He admitted online that he himself had used the medium in really unfair and mean-spirited ways in the past. For the sake of time, I'll just focus on the end of his article that he wrote. I think the whole thing's worth reading. It is one of the best witnesses that I have since seen of what a Christian public figure actually apologizing for their behavior online looks like and trying to make repentance for their behavior online. And I see this article as a sign of hope in a very polarized world that we've belonged to. But then what happens is you scroll to the comment section. And let me say up front, and any number of comments that appeared here were totally fine. Thanking Matthew for his courage in this regard, for admitting this, admiration for his writing. And then a sizable portion of the commentary begins to look like this. We've got ad hominem attacks on the editor, Matthew Schmitz himself, name-calling, sweeping stereotypes of whole groups of people. And then we get mass appeal is going to appear in this story. Mass appeal is trying to offer a nice expression of appreciation that gets followed by rudeness and name-calling, and then some very questionable theology, and then a very odd World War II reference. And then we get more stereotyping and rudeness and a call on truth, which I'll come back to in just a minute. This is a Catholic publication, apparently calling for violence. And then we get to my favorite, St. Nicholas, who has now come up onto the scene. And I would say, the reason why I wanted to highlight this is that St. Nicholas strangely frequently comes up on the scene as a justification for bad behavior of Christians one with each other. Even though this is the historical event that is being referenced here has no historical merit whatsoever. Nicholas was not at apparently the Council of Nicaea. But several years ago when I was working on the book Redeeming Conflict, which was about how we handle conflict better within our Catholic sphere, I went out on Facebook myself and asked my friends, I was like, so I'm looking for some examples of when conflict has been handled really well in church life. Like, we've got to have some examples of when we did this right. And the most frequent response I got back was Nicholas slapping Arius at the Council of Nicaea. Now, I will admit, I actually have a pretty nice friendship group on social media, and a lot of that response was tongue-in-cheek. But it said something to me about the fact that this is the first example that we are, as Christians ourselves, come up with for what a good example of conflict managed well looks like in church life. But it's interesting because this is the image that so many different commentators in the Christian sphere draw on as a model for what it looks like to stand up for truth. And I want to say that, I want to add that in because I think that is one of the things that's a unique dynamic that takes place in Christian conversation online that's a little bit different than how it's happening in secular conversations that are going on, is this idea that who has the truth and the necessity to defend the truth at all costs. So I think it's one of the things that makes the Christian online morass just a little bit different. Obviously, a poor quality of conversation goes on, is a much bigger problem than us. But in the Christian communication sphere, my suspicion is that we see less of this kind of random, generic insulting that's so widespread on secular sites. And we see a much higher frequency of respondents, maybe even on our own websites, that it plays a different kind of role because this word truth is so central to us as within our faith tradition. And of course, the protection of what one perceives as true, again, widespread on social media beyond ourselves, beyond faith-based site. I'm just saying that it plays a particularly prevalent role as a part of a dynamic that plays a different role because we are operating out of a faith tradition when we're online. And so before I go into some really pragmatic suggestions about whether and how to deal with this poor quality of Christian online conversation, I just want to take a moment to ground our conversation in this broader framework, if you want to say, of a Christian understanding of truth. Because I do actually think truth is an incredibly important value, And it's not that we want to go out there and abandon our concern for it when trying to enter into online conversation effectively. Like going in and saying, like, stop caring so much about truth. It's not the answer to this puzzle. And also, like, well, there are other values besides truth. No, there's not. I mean, like, that is the key value that we actually should be worrying about online. But what we need to figure out, it's because we do value truth as Christians so highly that we care about the poor quality of an online presence that we are putting out into the world in the first place. So instead of talking about Arius or Nicholas slapping Arius, the Council of Nicaea, let's just talk a little bit about the value of truth in the Christian tradition. And I want to draw on Thomas Aquinas here, who also, like Nicholas, was not at the Council of Nicaea, but might provide for us something that's a little bit more substantive to help ourselves here. The first definition that many of us would have for this word truth is that truth means having a mouth aligned with your mind. That what you say out of your mouth actually has to be in congruence with what you think in your head. And I think one of the challenges in modern day society that people think, well, I'm just telling the truth. I'm just being honest. I'm being straightforward with you. And that we perceive if a person's saying exactly what's on their mind, that constitutes a person who is truthful. Aquinas would say, yeah, that's a really good beginning for a definition on truth. Definitely, what comes out of your mouth should be aligned with what's in your mind. But there's something more than that. That's a cheap definition of truth if first what's in your mind is not aligned to what actually exists in the world, what actually is. You also have to have a mind that's aligned with reality. And reality, this is Aquinas' actual definition in Latin, veritatis est adequatio re ad intellectus, means having truth is the adequation of the mind with the adequation of reality and the intellect. That what you think is out there in the world actually is out there in the world. And if you're seeing things out there in the world that are not actually there, that is really problematic. Because it's not the world that's so much in danger as you are in danger of a massive crash, right, into reality. And that God has given us the capacity, Aquinas believes strongly, God has given us the capacity for reason, that it can allow us to see the world as it actually is. And that we are always trying to put the facts of the world together into forming a solid picture of what reality looks like. But a good definition of truth also means that we have to have an incredible amount of humility because reality is vast and big. One of my Dominican colleagues is keen to say, reality is like a bazillion volts of electricity. Most of us are working with about 60-watt bulbs in our brain. And even those of us in the room, pretty bright group who got 100-watt bulbs in our brain, in comparison to what is to be known, what we understand of reality is still so small in comparison to the whole of reality. So when we've got people online who are saying, I have the truth, you have, yay, much of access to reality. And so if we really, truly believe in objective reality, and I do, I believe there is a world out there right now that's not just a figment of my imagination, I also, to have objective truth, I need to recognize that my pursuit of truth is always only objective. I'm shooting for it. I'm looking for it. But I have to always be aware truth is not something I have, it's something that has me. I always need to be open to the fact there is more than what I have grasped at any particular moment in time. So then you could ask, okay, so if I'm intelligent and grasping reality, I'm using reason, and I'm honest about it, then can I say whatever I want online? Valuing truth in the Catholic tradition, there's even more to it than that. That what we are also doing with our brains is beyond just perceiving reality, we're figuring out, how am I going to live in it? What are the judgments that I'm going to make? How am I going to do right by the people who live around me who are living within reality too? And so I'm also concerned with how am I putting together, for the sake of the common good, the judgments that I'm making. And one of the pieces of that common good that I always have to be shooting for if I'm really vested in truth is being true to the relationships that exist in my life and around me. This is the most ancient biblical definition of truth. The Hebrew word was emet. It means fidelity. It means wanting the best for the other person. Even if I don't necessarily agree with them, I want the best for them. And so valuing truth means that I'm always working on online and offline, building up relationships. The whole purpose of online in the first place is to build up relationships with each other rather than tearing them down. And so whenever we're seeing a lack of charity online, we're also seeing a lack of truth, a violation of truth. And that whatever we're going to do as a Christian community online has to be understood within this broader perspective of truth, not just saying whatever it is that we've got on our mind that day. If I'm concerned in the Christian tradition, this wider sense of truth, I cannot understand truth. I cannot try to live truth without also caring about the way that different people are being treated online. So there's a phrase, and that's kind of axiomatic in the Catholic Church, that error has no rights. And it gets credited to Thomas Aquinas, and they've never found it in Thomas Aquinas' writing. But you've probably heard that before. Error has no rights. And I appreciate this quote, that regardless of whether or not error has rights, people have rights, even if their views are not the ones that we would necessarily agree with. Because for us as Christians, truth is never separate from a person because of the incarnation. Truth for us always comes within the experience of personhood. Now let me say, one of the reasons why it's super hard to treat people as persons online is because often we don't even know who they are. We don't even know, a lot of you are probably like, I don't even know who some of these people are who are posting on our comment section of our site. And a lot of times we only have a face. And sometimes, like in this situation, this is from the Matthew Schmitz article, I went and tracked down who the guy was. And this is their profile. Like, you don't even know their real name. You don't even know who you're really engaging with. And so if you wanted to reach out to this person, it would be impossible to actually enter into conversation with them. It's easier to have charity and have better relations, behave better with people who are right in front of us, who have body language, who we can see when we've said something that has impacted them, who have a backstory that we actually know. It's harder to stir empathy and work to create a right tone when we don't have a face to deal with, isn't it? Now, that being said, sometimes we do know who the people who are that we're interacting with online. They're our great Uncle Jedediah and our brother-in-law Ted. And I'm not saying that knowing the person makes the situation less fraught, right? Like many of you are like, oh, it's even worse, right, when I know the person. I'm actually only saying that the temptation to not treat each other as people is higher because of the way that the platforms themselves are set up where you can be anonymous. So the first question then is, do we as communicators on the online world, do we actually have to do anything at all? Because when nasty stuff gets posted, even in the comment section, say even like our congregational website page, the first option that we've always got is just let it sit there, because in 48 hours it's going to disappear from the world's view, right? It's just going to blow over. And a lot of times we have many other things that we're about, and so whether there's nastiness in the comment section on our own pages, if there are more than 24 hours in a day. The challenge with that, though, is that just letting it go and just ignoring what's happening is that, first off, it's connected with our name. So professionally or personally, it does impact our reputation in the world. There was an interesting research that was done by a journal that was called the Journal of Computer-Mediated Communication, related to something that's called the nasty effect, which I'm sure you are probably more familiar with even than I am. But it notes that when an essay has been posted and the comments below it are of an unsavory nature, that the people who read the comment section actually then don't believe the article itself, because it's like because of what they've read in the comments. There was a very recent study that was done in 2023 from the Reuters Institute on the Digital News Report, indicates something similar, which correlates the relationship between people's exposure to criticism of news media and their ability to trust the news itself, which has there's some benefits to that, right? We should always be looking at things with a curious and a suspicious mind. But I think we've also seen the extremes of that during COVID, where people are like, well, I can't trust anything that I'm being told. I need to go do research on this myself. As if we had the scientific knowledge and capacity to assess original data points for ourselves. So that there's such a lack of trust that people aren't able to even do things that would be really important for the sake of the common good. Furthermore, I could say that there's research that nastiness online is contagious. So there was an article that came out some time ago called "Anyone Can Become a Troll" from Stanford Research. Actual trolls are not all that great in number online. But if you are in a bad mood and you read what a troll has posted online, trolling-like behavior increases 89% after somebody has read something negative. Like if they read a negative, nasty comment, they're more likely to post something of that same vein, especially if they've had a bad day. So on any given day in our lives, we might say, I don't have the time to be going through all these social media feed and checking all of these different comments. And that might be the best answer you've got for the day. But if you're going for the long haul strategy, it both is decreasing our credibility as communicators online and also adding to a little bit of nastiness in the world. So the next question I want to ask then is, if it's on there, do I have to engage? You're like, isn't that the question you just asked? I think this is a slightly different question than the one posed. The first is, do I have to do anything about it at all? The second one is, do I actually have to enter into conversation with that person or persons? The research on this actually is saying that you don't really want to engage trolls online. Don't feed the trolls is a common phrase, and there's a great report that came out, I think it's from the Center on Digital Hate, called basically "Don't Feed the Trolls." And the reason why for that, technically speaking, a troll is someone who's online to intentionally disrupt conversation. If the purpose of any form of communication is to, out of truth, to build relationality with each other, the troll up there is a violation of truth, because the purpose of that person being there is actually trying to divide community, trying to fragment community. And the research on trolls is, and you know this already, is that trolls tend to be male, and that when they've done psychological assessments on persons who have trolling behavior, they rank higher in sadism, which is they take joy in other people being upset. They rank higher in Machiavellianism, which means that they have strong tendencies toward manipulation, and in psychopathy, which is that they regularly exhibit antisocial, and they also experience no remorse for what they've done to the community's life. So trolls are not out there about the search for truth, but they actually get pleasure from the disruption of conversation. And there's a great quote from George Bernard Shaw, who says, "I learned long ago, never wrestle with a pig. You get dirty, and the pig seems to like it." So instead of that, what are our options if we don't really you don't want to get into conversation with actual people who are trolling? The first thing is to shut down the comment section on websites. So it was interesting, NPR, after they posted that really cheerful comment in 2008. In 2013, they took down their comment section. Reuters has taken it down. Popular Science has taken it down. So a lot of places on websites, they've just simply taken it down. You don't have the capacity to comment anymore. The second thing is to heavily monitor comments that are bad posts and delete them. So places that are really big media organizations like the Washington Post or America Magazine, like they've even bought a Coral project. I don't entirely understand this, but it's an open source software that helps monitor a page that can take down stuff immediately as soon as it gets up there, or perhaps even stop it from getting up there. The other thing, which when I've asked a lot of younger people for their advice on what to do, is to work the algorithm some, so that instead of trying to enter into conversation with that person, if the good news is something that you want to get out there more, instead of replying back, take the original article and repost it and start the thread all over again. And don't, because the way that the algorithms are set up is that the more conversation gets started on something, the higher it moves in everybody's feed, and so hence it actually draws more attraction to the negative rather than allowing the positive to shine. And so just restart a brand new thread with the same article. Share it afresh. And the recommendation also, when I've looked at what different people are saying, is to block, as quickly as possible, block the users from being able to offer comments online at all. So the question is, though, it's not always really a lot of the bad behavior that we see online. It might not actually really be trolls, but it could be people who are exhibiting bad behavior, maybe because, again, they had a bad day and they're imitating what they've seen. And many people, I do think, do have a genuine desire for truth that we can appeal to, even if it's misguided. So let's go back to the Schmitz article just for a moment. And this is the same, it's one of the screens I showed you before. And we'll just look at one slide of where the radical R is showing up again. It's hard always to know, is this a troll? Is he actually motivated by a sense that he has to defend truth? It's hard because he uses the language of truth very generously, but there are a couple of indications that he would fit the troll mold. He seems to delight in inflammatory, divisive language. He also replies back a lot, which is a sign of a troll, with lots of different people, and in a way that kind of eggs on an increasing sense of outrage. Note that he never contributes anything new to the conversation. He shows no signs of moderating or nuancing his views over time, and which gives an indication, again, he's not there to learn anything new. That's, again, a sense that this person is not really deeply committed to truth. If they were deeply committed to truth, they would believe they had something more of reality to learn. So I would say this, if I were First Things, I would simply block this person from having access to posting again on the website. Because I think as much as poor mass appeal here is trying to enter into conversation with this person, and I admire their effort tremendously, I think they're actually just feeding the troll. But then you get people like this. This is a comment that was posted on one of my preachings from a couple months ago on the Feast of the Annunciation. It strikes me as a bit, Lars strikes me as a bit rude. I do not believe for a moment that he is sorry about anything. I don't know why he felt compelled to post it. But I also, I don't think anybody that's listening to the Dominican preaching website is going to be a troll. And I sense that this is a person who does value truth. In this case, I think honesty. And I could quibble with you about whether what he said needed to be said in a public forum or not. But he might be somebody I want to engage in a conversation, because there might be feedback that he's got for me that'd be interesting for me to know, like so that I could become a better preacher. And so if you did want to reach out to the LAR in your life, what would you do there? So the third question, my final question, what if I actually do want to try to engage some of the challenging conversations that I see going on online? Y'all don't look really excited about that possibility as a room. That's right. What if I do want to engage? The first tip, which I would want to share before going into the conversation, is to check your purposes. For what would be my purpose in trying to engage online? If my purpose is to go on to slap the other person, either physically or metaphorically, then I probably am not ready to enter into a conversation online. People who are publicly humiliated in any way, shape, or form tend to get more entrenched in whatever their view is, rather than, and more defensive about the righteousness of their view, rather than be like, that is so right, I'm so glad you pointed that out to me. Like, it's not a place where people actually are changing their minds a whole lot. So what are reasonable expectations that we could have for entering into a conversation online? I would say first I would check, do you think that you have anything to learn from talking with this person online? Like, would there be anything that do you have any questions that you would want to ask to find out more information from them? Like, what do you actually mean there? Or what could I have changed on this that would have been helpful to you? The second thing would be that, are you willing to share actually what your own perspective on the matter is, and be willing, you can describe the impact that the other person and their comments are having on you. And the reason why, we can get into this more in Q&A if you want to, but I think the reason why that's important is it reestablishes you as a person. I think oftentimes the other forgets that who they're talking to is a person. Often for them, you represent an organization or a stereotype that they have in their head. And when I actually name, like, oh, the impact that your comments have had on me, like, that reestablishes me as a person in the conversation again. And then the third one is if you're interested in problem solving. These are really good and achievable aims. Trying to persuade somebody else to change their mind online is not anything that you actually have control over, and all the statistics show people change their mind very, very little on things that matter a whole lot to them, but they never change their mind unless they feel like they've been heard first. So second tip in this regard is choose your forum. A lot of the struggles I think we're having societally and within church life right now in the online world is that we're using platforms that do not have infrastructure actually set up for conversation. Even though we're calling them conversations that we're having online, they really are one-directional communication that is asynchronous most of the time. Social media is really good still for making announcements, getting information out there, but they're not really built for a back and forth communication in the way that you and I could do when we're sitting at a table with each other. And of all that, Twitter, probably the least so of all. Now, I know that we can type more in now, but for the longest time, we were only able to type 280 characters in there. And what they were studying was that nobody actually was even paying attention to 280 characters. The average tweet was 33 characters. So it's not, if we really want to have conversation with other people, we don't talk to each other in sound bites like that. And if you really want to enter in, and you do know it's your Uncle Jedediah or your brother-in-law Ted, the easier thing is to find a different forum in which to carry on the conversation. To like private message the person instead of doing it publicly and say, hey, I could tell this is really important to you. Do you want to have coffee about this? Or let's get on the phone with each other. Because sometimes I think we're trying to use platforms that simply do not have the heft for the weight of the conversation that we as communicators in the broadest sense are trying to have. And in particular, nobody, as I mentioned, wants to be called out online. This is one of the things that in that Matthew Schmidt's article, he actually pointed out. He said, I'm going to try to do more justice and charity by those with whom I disagree, precisely because our disagreements matter, and it's important to describe them accurately rather than with caricature. Like we're going to need more space to do that than what online platforms oftentimes have. A third tip is don't expect to be able to reason through it online. So threaded discussion, we're learning in the field of education, is really good for joint paper writing, but it's not really good for discussion. So at the level of reason, what you can do online is add a little bit more information for the person to consider. Like, hey, here's another article that it's a little bit of a contrasting view to what you've posted. I think if you're interested in this topic, you might want to read this as well. It might help your thinking through on this really important topic. Or for what it's worth, I found this article to be really persuasive when I was trying to figure out how I think about this. Note that I'm giving reasoned information and I'm giving it in a reasonable tone, but I'm not actually entering into dialogue. I'm not inviting a whole bunch of back and forth that we're going to have an endless conversation about this. A fourth tip, and again, you can stop at any one of these or you can keep moving a little bit deeper. Where fitting, ask for more information about how they arrived at their stance. So rather than entering into debate on the topic itself, try to get a little bit more about the person's backstory and why this is important for them. At the Harvard Negotiation Project, there's a model that we oftentimes use when we're doing mediation in a group that is based out of something called the ladder of inference. It was designed by two professors at MIT, Chris Argyris and Don Shane, who were regularly going into groups like this, people who work with each other, have very common interests, and then when they'd have to take a stand on something, they would very quickly on the topic at hand, they would find that they were all standing in different corners of the room, at least metaphorically. And it was like, okay, so what is the process that the human brain moves through from gathering data to actually making a conclusion? And the ladder of inference is something that happens in every human brain. It happens in about 6 seconds, which is I move from the gathering of data. So right now, in this room, there is an immense amount of data that I could be paying attention to, that you could be paying attention to. You could be paying attention to the sound of my voice. You could be paying attention to the slide. You could be paying attention to what other people are wearing at your table, the pattern on the carpet, how many light bulbs there are. Like that's a fascinating chandelier piece, isn't it? One time my colleague was talking about the ladder of inference, and it was in a big hotel room with all the paneled ceilings. And he said, you could be paying attention to the number of panels on the ceiling. And somebody in the back of the room raised their hand and said, 482. And you know that if you're a speaker or a communicator, that's like the worst thing that can happen to you, right? Because in your own internal voice at that moment, it's like, how boring must I be that they are counting ceiling tiles? So I'd be very alarmed if any of you told me you knew how many tubes were in the light fixtures right now. But he in the moment, he paused and he goes, how do you know that? And the guy goes, oh, I'm so sorry. I used to be a ceiling tile salesman. And he said, it drives my wife nuts because we'll go grocery shopping and I'll walk into the store and I'll be like, I could do this job, $6,000, 12 boxes, right? Like all the time I'm thinking about ceiling tiles. And he actually, in doing that, he perfectly illumines the ladder of inference. Because right now, again, as I said, there is so much data, even just in this room. Bazillion volts of electricity. We are only working with 60-watt bulbs in our brain, 100-watt bulbs in our brain. What happens is, without even knowing it, we are always selecting the data that we consider to be the most important data for our lives. What would be important for our own survival and thriving. And so if I'm a ceiling tile salesman, that's important data. If I'm a public speaker, that is not important data, right? So I'm not paying attention to it. But I'm not even aware of how much that I've cut out by this data that I've selected. I'm not even aware of all that I'm not paying attending to. But then, even of the data that I've selected, I'm going to add my own reasoning and interpretation to that data. You know, so that if today, if I walk out of the room, let's just say later in the afternoon, and there's a rain shower, and then the sun comes back out, and there's a beautiful rainbow in the sky, those of us who walk out of the space and are going out onto the street, and let's say there's all these puddles, like some of us are walking out in heels, really unpleasant experience of getting wet before. I'm not even paying attention to the sky. I'm just paying attention to where not to step in it on the parking lot, right? But then others of us do spot, oh, there's a glorious rainbow in the sky. Half of us who are there, the old science teachers in the group, are going to be like, I just love the way that light reflects against water particles in the atmosphere. That's awesome. And then the other half of us, because we're Catholic communicators, if you see a rainbow in the sky, what do you think? Noah, Ark. It's a sign from God. It's all in good hands, right? And so then my brother's a science teacher. Like he and we walk in at the end of the day, and he walks in, he's like, what a miserable, mucky day. And I'm like, it's all good. God has us in like right hands. And my brother's like, what are you even talking about? How did God get into the conversation? So it's like, but what happens is when we're moving up the ladder of inference, we just share our conclusions. And what happens more than anything else online is that most of the conversations that are happening online happen at the very top rung of the ladder. All that we're doing back and forth online is simply sharing our conclusions with each other. If we really want to enter into conversation, in person, especially online, can we ask questions at the lower rung of the ladder? Because this baby and this cat are both looking at that same fish from really different ladders of inference, right? Like what that fish means in their own survival and thriving as a species is very different. And online, oftentimes that is what is going on also. So it can be saying things like, online, it sounds like this topic is, I'm not engaging in the topic itself, right? It sounds like this topic is really important to you. How did you become so committed to this issue? Or things like, what have you seen or experienced that made you really want to speak out about this? Or what would you be worried about if things went in the opposite direction? Oftentimes when people are really backed into a corner and very defensive about where it is that they're standing, fear is always involved. There's something that they're afraid, if this happens, it would be something is threatening to my own survival and thriving. And so these kinds of questions, note I'm not getting into a debate, but I am inviting relationship, or I am inviting bridge building. And I know while many of us, myself included, are like, I'm not going to spend that much time to form relationships with all the people who are up there, there are more and more a growing cadre of ministers in the church who really their prime ministry field is engaging in ministry online. Like actually trying to engage people in deeper conversations and build bridges in this way. Fifth point, make clear distinctions between intent and impact online. It is possible that I might really, really value truth, and I'm trying to protect Catholic dogma, and it can be that the impact of my posting might actually make you want to leave the church. It might make you feel disrespected. So oftentimes we think, well, if I have good intentions, then you should be well impacted by my words because my intentions were good. I'm just telling you the truth, right? The flip of it though, all of us know that we've seen stuff online that's been really offensive to us. And when we see stuff that's really offensive, we're pretty sure the other person meant to offend us. And if they didn't mean to offend us, then they have some chronic character flaw that makes them unable to see what any person with common sense should know. So oftentimes in our own mind, we link intention and impact. And one of the most helpful things to recognize is it's possible I can have good intentions and that I've had a negative impact on other people. And it's possible that I can be negatively impacted and the other person has had good intentions. And so having those conversations online, I do think is possible. And it can be pretty quick in the conversation. It can just be like, I'm guessing that your goal here is to try to show how much you care about your Catholic faith. At the same time, the tenor of the conversation's been very hurtful to me. Or this violates my sense of what good Christian conversation looks like. They don't have to honor your feelings or your sense of appropriateness, but if you directly identify the impact that it has on you and the person's not a troll, then getting that feedback is something that they'll think about a little bit more. And the flip of it also is, our intention in posting this article online was to start a conversation about a topic that means a lot, not to peeve people, but to highlight an issue that we care about a lot. I hope that intention's coming across loud and strong. Final tip. If you're posting something that you know to be controversial, and many of the congregations that we work for have taken very strong social justice stances that are controversial in the world, and just posting on things that are of deep value to the congregations themselves can cause a bit of a flare-up in the comment sections. To sometimes when posting things themselves that you know might be controversial, to go ahead and to put that in as you post it. So my son will oftentimes say, hey, I know this is a hot take. Reminder, I really want a respectful and peaceful conversation here. Father Jim Martin, oftentimes at the beginning of things he posts, says, no ad hominem attacks and a 2-response limit. Just make it clear at the outset what you're shooting for. Or sometimes I've also said, here's a question that I would love to hear people comment on from this article. So narrow down, like, what is it that you would be interested in talking about? Other comments, let's say, for another time. So I could ask you, and maybe I will do this at your tables. This is like 3 minutes. If I wanted to reply back to Lar, what would you recommend to me that I post in response? Turn to your table mates. I'll call you back in 3 minutes, and I'll look for suggestions. Wherever you're at in your conversation, I invite you to pause. Any suggestions for me from the group as to what might, if I wanted, I don't have to reply back to Lars, but if I wanted to reply back, any suggestions? What you would ask? Yeah.
We had a variety of reactions.
Yeah.
But a couple of us felt strongly to say, like, what was it you would like to, what would have been a good content direction?
Yeah.
To benefit my, future comments.
Yeah, I think that would have been a great question to ask. Yeah, where would you have taken this homily if you were preaching on the same reading? What would you have wanted to hear about? Yeah. Yeah.
We said, thanks for your honesty, let me acknowledge that, and then the answer is 2 questions.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Thanks for your honesty. And then answer, yeah. Well, to actually respond back, like give the central preaching point and then show my exegesis. That's a possibility. It might come across as defensive, which is interesting because he's asking the question, but if I respond to it, because a rhetorical question, if you actually respond to it, like it might come across as defensive. But yeah, it probably would quiet him down. Yeah.
As opposed to just answering the questions, you could also, after answering them, follow up with one, why do you think this is irrelevant? If you're asking a question and turn it back on,
Yeah, like something, was there a point where I lost you? Like at what point, like in the homily, like, sorry, no. But asking him, like, when you listened to it, was there a particular point in which, like, all of a sudden it became irrelevant to you? That's what I mean by that, sorry. Yeah. Like, I think that would be interesting. Could you tell me where it got irrelevant for you, or what was it that, yeah?
We had said also maybe if there were source documents or some kind of research to also send them a link to that.
Yeah.
I found some of this.
Yeah. So it sounds like it sounds like you're really interested in the exegesis of it. Here's a place you might want to check if you want to do a deeper dive into the genre of the Annunciation. Yeah.
I mean, if we are interested to answer it, that means we have time to continue this conversation.
I know. See, this is the challenge, right? Yeah.
So that would be best if there is time for that.
Yeah. Are you getting more nervous though about ever putting your email out on a public site where anybody can find it?
Well, there is an email just for those.
Okay.
You
Right. Yeah. So it could be, let me reach out to you at your, yeah, let me reach out to you and see if we can pick up the conversation more. Right. To move it, to make sure it's not public conversation. Right. I might get more comments on how irrelevant I am. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, one more.
I'm concerned about getting into sharing, what he's asking you to provide here, because I just feel like that gets into an argument almost with
Right.
I think it's fine to respond to what was the central point or preaching point. And then I love the idea of somebody back here said invite, or maybe you said invite him to share his thoughts on what direction he would have
Taken it.
or he or she, and given them the opportunity to offer that.
Yeah.
Another point that I love, I've been listening to Bishop Robert Barron for years, and he always said, if you're going to engage somebody in something like this online, start your reply with friend.
Yeah, he's good about that.
Which I thought was lovely. It sort of brings you around to their side of the table. We're not fighting, we're just having a discussion, and I respect their opinion.
Right. And again, it's a very gentle way of reminding that the purpose of conversation is to build relationship rather than to break it. Yeah. I wouldn't have thought of that on this one, but yeah, I could start that friend. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I don't oftentimes reply to these either, but it's if I have time, and if I do have the capacity, I do think it would be helpful for me to learn. I'm always wanting to get better, right? And if the person has something that would be helpful, I could learn it. I don't necessarily need to agree with what they have to say, but I could get more information that might be important to me. Yeah. Well, let me invite you. Here's my final tip. It's not really a tip, but what I've tried to do is to start an online rules of engagement pledge, which I am trying to invite more widely. I see this group as being potential allies in this. Not that I think you're violating any of these rules as it is, but that you have the capacity to reach more people in your communities to say, we as Catholic communicators, can we be part of changing the tenor of online conversations much more broadly? So inviting your populations that you're reaching out to. The bishops also have a great one called Civilize It, which I think is going to be important to broadcast more widely as the next election draws near. But this one, I don't do anything, like I won't spam you or anything for anybody who signs it, but it's just a public way of saying, like, yeah, these are things that I commit to doing online. And that what I've posted is, and I've said this more widely to people too, if you ever see me do something online that you think is like, oh, Anne, think that through, you are welcome to post that emoji in my feed to wake me up. And I have this dream of starting a whole thread of Catholic little memes around that we could just share with each other. Like, I think with St. Dimphna, you might need to look at that more carefully. Or, if I post St. Francis, it's like, is this really helping to spread peace in the world? Or is love the motivation behind what's going on here? So just, are there ways in which we could partner with each other for when we recognize that we've gotten ourselves out of whack or not being who we want to be online? Yes. Brief moment, if anybody's got a question that they want to ask from the group. I'll put up there some of the stuff that I've written on difficult conversations in general. Yeah.
What do you suggest if a comment is made that's not favorable at all, and you don't engage in it, but your audience engages in that person? And so there's kind of a battle on either your Facebook page or whatnot.
Right.
You have it as an organization engaged, but your people who are supporting you
are engaging in it.
not going well. I mean, what do you suggest there?
I know you're like, this is a nightmare. My recommendation is you probably will need to engage within the conversation from an organizational standpoint. Yeah, and if nothing else, just to remind for the purpose for why we posted this article. So our intention in posting this was to try to stimulate a conversation around an issue that is of core importance to the sisters of our community. They are particularly interested in getting your feedback on this topic. Or they're like, let's maybe we could focus our feedback on this question and narrow what it is that you're hoping the conversation will do.
And then the same rules would apply if there's like really nasty comments between people, you would take those down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, it takes a lot of time, doesn't it? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I guess I just like your reaction to something that happened to me recently in this vein. And I don't know if I handled it correctly or not, or if you recommend this or not, but it was in response to one of our sisters recently turned 101, and we had a picture of her at her birthday party. It was very sweet. It was very nice, and lots of very positive comments and warm memories of the sister from her students. And then one person posted, "Those sisters could be awfully mean." And that made me wince. It was one of the only negative comments. And I responded, as soon as I saw it, I did respond to it. And I said, "My apologies if anything any sister did hurt you or made you feel badly." And that's all. And almost immediately the response came back, "Thanks." And it was done. And there wasn't, like, nobody jumped on or nobody else said, "Oh yeah, they were really mean to me too." Or, that's what I was worried about, is you get something like that going.
Yeah.
But that just stopped it. There wasn't another comment from anyone about it.
Yeah.
Do you recommend doing that, or is that almost an admission of guilt, or should I?
Okay, first off, I'll tell you my favorite, this is the line I'm living by right now. If there was an answer to this question, we would have figured it out by now. The more I'm in difficult conversations and mediation circles, I'm just like, oh, there's not an answer to this. So I don't think there's an answer to it. The one thing I would just say, the research that's been done on apology can be really important. The one challenge is with apology, I hesitate to apologize for somebody else. The other challenge is using the word if. So I'm sorry if you were hurt. It is the question, it sounds like you were hurt by the sisters. That makes me, I'm so sorry to hear that, or I'm sad, that makes me sad to hear. If it would be helpful to have a sister reach out to you, please private message me and we'll have somebody reach out to you. Or something like that. But I think that's that's just a tweak on the vein. I think what you did was beautiful, and I'm glad that it was healing for that person. And it sounds like it did work. Yeah. Yeah. So just saying, it is just the sense that it sounds like that was really impactful on you. You're still remembering it many years later. Reach out to me if you want to talk more about it. Great. Well, thank you for giving me the gift of an hour with you this morning. It was good to be with you. I look forward to connecting with you at break. Yeah. And I'll invite Kim up. Oh, I have some free resources on my website, theangarrido.com, under the Help Yourself bar, if there's some stuff that you want to look up more deeply on the topic we've been talking about. Okay. Great.